Welcome to Fear It Goes, the podcast all about taking your fears with you and doing it anyway. I'm your host, Brandy Taylor. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to Fear It Goes. Today's episode, we are talking to the infamous, most amazing, yes, I'm pumping her up, Susan Dedeluk. She is a mediator, a divorce mediator, and absolutely spectacular. And I'm very excited to bring you this episode because we're going to talk about all the pitfalls that go into when we can't reconcile a relationship, how to go into a divorce in a healthy way, how to separate the relationship both financially and emotionally in the most healthy ways. 1 in 2 people or 1 in 2 marriages fail. There are many reasons for that, and we can discuss some of that today. But when they do, what do we do so that we don't hold on to all of the resentments or anger or fear, or there's a lot of fear in divorce? How do we go about doing this in a way that's ultimately, in the end, going to benefit everyone? Because really, it shouldn't be about people losing. It should be about people moving forward and moving through things that are not the easiest, but that can be healthy. So, without further ado, I am so excited to bring you Susan. Yay! Welcome, Susan. Thank you so much for being a part of Fear It Goes and coming on board to have this lovely discussion around how to mitigate divorce and separation in the most healthy ways possible. Thank you for joining us, Susan.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are going to talk about some of the healthiest ways we can move into settlements and move through divorce that is, it's a difficult time and it's a fearful time, and there's a lot that goes on with the separation of partners and families. And I know personally from personal experience that this was, for us, it was pretty clean. But it was still, there's still moments in it, and there was still a lot of fear in it, not knowing what this was going to look like on the other side, not knowing what this was going to look like financially, and taking responsibility of finances. And that's pretty scary when you're not used to doing that. Mm-hmm. And then just the whole concept around kids and how they play into this too. Oh, so much fun. A separation, splitting of lives can be. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it is definitely fearful for most people. Most people sort of come into a separation without having done it before and without having any sense of what it is going to look like, what it's going to feel like, how they're going to navigate it. And on top of not having experienced it before, they come in with their own preconceived notions about what it's supposed to look like or what it has looked like, for people that they know. And
right.
All these different stories sort of form this idea of what it could potentially be like, and it's usually pretty negative stuff that they're carrying with them.
Well, it's interesting because there was about 3 of us that all went through separation and divorce at about the same time, and theirs looked extremely different than mine did. Mm-hmm. My ex and I were very willing to come in mostly with very open minds and mostly with the feeling of I don't want to kill you.
Right.
I don't hate you. So we were pretty good with our structuring. And I guess, okay, so let's start with, we talked about preconceived ideas with divorces. So what are some of the biggest preconceived ideas that people come in with when they first see you and they have no idea what this is going to be like? And let's say there's a fair amount of money or debt on the line.
Mm-hmm. I think that people are very fearful when it comes to money, in particular, because they know that their lives are going to change pretty dramatically through a separation. So, any couple that needs to divide their assets and needs to divide their debt is going to have a significantly different outcome post-separation than they do during the marriage, in
Right.
terms of financial stability and potentially income. So there's a lot to unpack there and to work through.
And that's definitely probably a limiter as to why sometimes people will stay together when it's not
Absolutely.
healthy to stay
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
together.
mm-hmm, because of the fear around it. But it's 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 hard because it's such a big change. It's such a dramatic shift in the way that you think about things. And when you're approaching it from a place of fear, there's a sense of wanting to protect, what you think you deserve or what you think should be yours. And really, it needs to be a conversation about what's the best way for everybody to move forward. How do we move this family from one home into two homes? And often money is a big part of that discussion.
Right. Just thinking when we were talking about limiters and why people wouldn't. Um, I just want to address this here, even though this is related. But just the concept around we stay because we're afraid of making that shift. Because no one can deny that's a huge transition.
Mm-hmm,
It's a
mm-hmm,
really big event in your life, a divorce or a marriage, a
mm-hmm.
joining or a separating of partners, of lives. But the reason people stay and what it does. So I looked very much from this space when my ex and I were splitting, is I didn't want my kids to grow up believing that this was what a relationship should look like.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to set this as their standard and their norm for healthy relationships moving forward into their adult life.
Yeah.
And that to me was a much bigger deterrent or a much bigger factor as to why to move forward
A
than to not.
motivating factor.
Yes,
Mm-hmm,
than to
mm-hmm.
not move forward because of fear of separating assets or things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that, everybody has their own sort of limiting factors or reasons why they might stay. And for some people, it might be money. And especially if you're in a partnership where you are not the main breadwinner, or you haven't worked a significant amount, sometimes for many, many years, it can be very overwhelming to think about the possibility of being financially independent from somebody else. But
Right.
that doesn't mean that the conversation doesn't have to happen and that there needs to be, a plan.
What do you mean I can't avoid that?
Yeah.
I can't avoid that. I can't just stuff that down in a little box over here.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and for other people, it's more about the fear around the kids or around sort of letting go, for lack of a better phrase, of having their kids sort of around and in their home full time, because that's not generally what happens as an outcome of a separation.
Right. That's actually something too that I know that's not really what you address, but I want to address here is how we work through divorce with kids. So from a financial standpoint, obviously there's responsibilities between the two parents and child support and things like that, and an equalization between two houses.
Mm-hmm.
However, I will never forget the transition period it took for the boys when we split. And they were going back and forth between the houses and trying to figure out what was going to work for us. So was it 1 week, 2 weeks, a few
Mm-hmm.
days, like the agreements that come into play in the separation agreement, and what's going to work best for them, not what's going to work best for us.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really interesting because there was probably a good 6 to 8 month transition of just really upset, really trying to understand these new settings and these new parameters for themselves. And it's heartbreaking as a parent. There's many things we can do to help them through these transitions. And obviously, having a counselor or a therapist or a family counselor even in this situation would help.
Yes.
But being open to talking and just giving them lots of support, and how unbelievably important that is to put your own bullshit feelings aside, regardless of what you're experiencing with your spouse or ex-spouse, and really be able to be there for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touch on something else that's really important in there. And, you know, what works for one family isn't going to work for another family. There is
True.
no one
Magic
solution. there's no, you know, so many people sort of approach mediation with this idea that they want 50-50. You know, I hear that all the time. I want 50-50. I want it to be equal. But that's not necessarily week on, week off for everybody. You know, sometimes that's what couples end up agreeing to, or what they agree to try. But there's no cookie cutter sort of mold that works best. Every child is different. Every couple is different. You know, you need to take into account their personality types and your personality types, and their schedules and your schedules, and how can we really maximize the good quality time that they are spending with each of you. That's really the goal, I think.
I totally agree. Quality over quantity for sure. And the experience that we give them, regardless of which home they're in. And that's not always so easy to voice.
Yeah. And the other piece is that lots of parents agree to, you know, try something, or they have an idea in their head about what they think they want to do. And I say, well, try it. And if it doesn't work, then acknowledge that, and let's talk about some different possible options. You know, some kids don't transition really well at the beginning of the week, or at the end of the week, or in the mornings, or in the evenings. Some kids need to have that like check in with the other parent on a more regular basis than others. It just, every situation and every family is so different. And so that's why mediation is so helpful, you know, in terms of being able to explore that in detail.
And being open to the fact that the separation agreement today may not be what it looks like tomorrow.
Absolutely. Yeah. What works for your family now probably is in all likelihood not what you're going to be doing in 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So you have to leave room for the possibility that things will need to be adjusted.
Right. So I'm sure a lot of people ask, why a mediator over a lawyer, or why a lawyer over a mediator? Because the functionality of both roles is quite different.
I think you need both, if at all possible. If at all possible, I think that people need to make as many decisions as they can for their own family with the help of a mediator. The mediator really can just help keep the conversation on track, make sure that you're addressing all the pieces that need to be addressed, that your lawyers are probably going to ask about when they are putting it into any sort of final agreement. But they can also help you sort of explore options, you know, discuss different possible scenarios, and really help understand what's important to each of you, and what the goals of mediation are, sort of big picture for each of you.
Well, one of the big differences too would also be that mediation typically has both of you in the session, correct? In comparison to lawyers, which are independent. Yeah.
Right.
Which,
so, and you can do lawyer assisted mediation. You can have lawyers as part of the mediation process, or you could choose to do that on your own without your lawyers present. Some people need the support of their lawyer in order to sort of make the process productive and useful. Sometimes couples aren't able to sort of keep it on track without that extra support. Which is fine. And it's still better than, in my opinion, it's still better than the lawyers going back and forth and making those decisions. But either way, I think that you need to have, you know, your independent counsel, whether you are sort of using them outside of the process or inside the process, or maybe a combination of both. It's really important that you understand what your legal rights and obligations are coming into the mediation process.
Right. I think that was something that was really good, is you had kind of prepared me in a lot of ways. So Susan was my mediator. Yay! Thank goodness. But you prepared me for a lot of things that I needed to kind of discuss with my lawyer once we sat down. And she she advised certain things that I didn't want. So I was already prepared for those discussions
Right.
because you and I
Right.
discussed it. Otherwise, I would
Mhm.
have been like, oh, well, maybe that is the way, or because lawyers are on your side.
Mhm.
And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but there is
Mhm.
something to be said about an impartial stand um, between the two parties that are
Right.
separating, right?
Mhm.
And that was lovely about being in mediation is you have this impartial viewpoint coming in and discussing options and things that are going to come up so that all parties are aware and no one's blindsided by, oh, and by the way, the whole time
Right.
you were home with the kids, you're entitled to, reimbursement for that
Mhm.
time that you weren't working. And I knew that I didn't want to take that. And my lawyer was like, are you sure you don't want to do that? You really should do that. And I went, no, I really don't want to do that.
Mhm. And as it relates to ongoing spousal support or spousal support discussions in general, every situation is so incredibly
Different.
unique and
Yeah.
different, and there are so many factors that it's very hard to negotiate as a mediator when people come in without that legal advice, without understanding sort of the law around spousal support and what the what the goalposts are, because there's a wide range of things that could happen if you end up, in court or asking a third party to make a decision on your behalf. But
Right.
even just understanding what those goalposts are can be really important in part of the negotiation process.
Well, and definitely for preparatory reasons, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For
Yeah.
sure. Okay, so I'm sure you've had some very interesting cases come through your door. What do you see as one of the biggest challenges people face when they come in and see you? Is it just
Mm.
that trying to get on the same page? Is it um, like what are some of the bigger challenges, and what are some of the best ways for us to prepare ourselves so we can come into this from a healthy position?
Right. I think it's really important that both parties are the in the right headspace to sort of begin these negotiations. Um, because when a couple is separating, there's typically one person that's pretty far ahead in the process,
The one
right?
that said, I'm done.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. And then the other partner is sort of left, sort of playing catch up. And sometimes the other partner has been there for a number of years, and their spouse has no idea and truly is blindsided. And so they're going to be in completely different headspaces as they approach mediation. And so I think ensuring that both parties really are in a place where they are able to focus on the future and sort of what's next, as opposed to one person negotiating, hoping that there's still a chance for reconciliation, or somebody negotiating just from a really heavy place of guilt, um, or being hurt, or all of these really heavy emotions. I think it's important that they are working through those things with potentially a therapist, so that they
Right.
are in the right headspace to negotiate what their future looks like, so that they're not making decisions from a place of such extreme emotion that are going to impact them for years and years to come, and potentially their children too.
Absolutely. Okay, so right headspace, very, very
Mm-hmm.
important. I would
Mm-hmm.
totally
Mm-hmm.
agree.
Yeah.
We were fortunate enough that we had numerous discussions before we actually went in and saw you.
Mm-hmm.
So we were in a relatively good space. There were a few things that were
Mm-hmm.
hiccups, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean, ultimately, like in comparison, speaking of heavy emotions and guilt and um,
Yeah.
I have two of my very, very close friends. One is in heavy guilt, so pretty well has given his ex-wife
Right.
whatever they want, which is disastrous. And then the other one went through such a tough time with the divorce, complete devastation. So
Mm-hmm.
went through a period of depression, which she used against him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so surprised.
Yeah.
I'm so surprised that the courts allow that to be like a tool, because at one point she kept the kids from him completely. I don't
Yeah.
even know how that's
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, our system is fairly broken. Courts aren't meant to decide family disputes, really. And it, it's just very hard to access sort of timely intervention when there are such extreme emotions, and
Right.
and it's really one of the most difficult situations when the children particularly are being used as
Pawns.
a way to make the other parent pay, for perceived wrongdoing, regardless of the circumstances, of a separation. That is adult stuff, and should never impact
We should be
either
bringing the kids into it. Yeah,
parents'
absolutely.
ability to continue to parent and to be involved in their lives. Um, Obviously, if there's safety concerns or issues like that, that's a different conversation and a different issue. Where children absolutely need to be protected, but
Yep.
when we're talking adult stuff versus things that the children shouldn't be involved in, it's really difficult.
Just on that note, have you experienced a lot? Okay, so actually it just leads me back to what is what is the course you have to take to get divorced? You have to have this course.
The Parenting After Separation seminar.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a name for this, but we're not going to say that here. But it's a very interesting course, and I do think everyone should have to take this, because it puts everything into perspective around how we behave as adults with each other and with our kids with each other, and how we support each other or don't. And emotions are a funny thing when it comes to separating and divorce.
Yeah. A big part of that Parenting After Separation seminar is, sort of, well, there's many things, but one of the, main sort of teachings is how to move your relationship, your marriage from a romantic relationship into, now a co-parenting relationship, and really working to disconnect those two things, because they should be unrelated. At the end of the day, you're still parents, you're still going to co-parent, and you need to move to this business-like relationship. If you can't be friendly, not everybody can. If you can, that's great, power to you. But if you can't, you need to at least be able to handle parenting in a business-like fashion for your children. I mean, they deserve that.
They do deserve that. And we want to rear amazing people in the world, not massively damaged people, because we went through a period of damage ourselves, or a period of what we felt was damaging. Yeah. Right.
And we do know that kids are resilient, and they will be okay. I'm a child of divorce. I know many children of divorce who are functioning, happy, well-adjusted human beings.
Absolutely.
I am divorced. I think that my kids are happy, healthy, functioning little human beings, and I think that has to be the focus. And kids are resilient. The greatest predictor of how kids will come out the other side of their experience of divorce is the level of conflict that they are directly exposed to between the parents. So even if you are fighting, don't fight around the kids. Don't talk about it with the kids.
That's one of the things I find so insane, is a conversation with your child about what's going on with your ex. One of my friends that's in this divorce, that has been part of the reason why one of his children will not speak to him, is the conversations his ex is having with their daughter.
Yeah.
I
Parental
can't even
alienation
fathom that.
is a serious thing, and it's so heart-wrenching and sad. Yeah.
I wonder, okay, so you're dealing with kids who are in their teens, right? And what does that mean for them later on when they actually unpack that? Because that is something to unpack.
Yeah, and it will happen. And kids are smart. They're intuitive, and they will come to realize that one parent, if this is happening, that one parent was the sort of driving force between the damage of that relationship. It's only going to eventually hurt their relationship with the child.
But they're my friend. That's a weird thing too with parents. As much as I love my boys and we are buddies sometimes, but there's other times I'm like, we are not equals. You are not, like, yes, I love you, but I'm your parent. I have a job to do here. And my job is to make sure that you're the best human that can go out there, even with all of my own neuroses and with your own neuroses, that I can send you out into the world in the most productive way. So how do we do that? And if I'm always your buddy and you're always my buddy, I'm not really parenting you at all.
Right.
I know this is totally off topic of divorce, but I just find that really interesting, just because, again, I shouldn't be confiding in you about my ex or in the midst of the divorce because you're my friend.
No,
that's
never.
Not what you do with your kids in a divorce.
No. And don't let them overhear it either. Talk to your friends, talk to your therapist, talk to whoever you need to, but make sure that your children are not around.
Part of it. Yeah. Make sure they're not part of it. When people have been financially disconnected in the divorce or in the marriage. So let's say scenario goes, I have been supported by my husband or wife, whichever the case may be, through the whole marriage. I don't know how to function on my own.
Right.
I can't even fathom what that would look like moving into a divorce, how unbelievably scary that would be, and then what to do. What would you typically recommend to someone who's coming into this from that space?
Yeah. So I think that often, in these types of situations, certainly starting off with some legal advice is a good idea. So understanding what the law says around these situations. And often there's going to be an entitlement to ongoing spousal support. So the goal of spousal support is that one person shouldn't be significantly financially disadvantaged by a separation or a divorce, regardless of, who made the decision to separate or why you're separating. The point is that there shouldn't be a significant financial disadvantage to one spouse. And so understanding what the law says around spousal support is important, but also knowing that there is an expectation of a move towards financial independence. And that is the eventual goal, assuming that you are, young enough that you can look at, okay, if I am responsible for my own financial well-being on a go-forward basis or after X number of years, what does that look like for me? And so often you have to go back to how do I want to earn my own income, right? Is there retraining? Is there re-education required? Am I already educated? Is it a matter of finding a job and re-entering the workforce? All of those questions. But these can also be impacted by kids. Are there young kids at home? What's the expectation? What was the agreement between the spouses? Was it that one person is going to be at home while the kids are young or until they are, in school full time or in high school, or different couples have different
agreements
about what that might look like.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're able to sort of continue those agreements if there is enough financial support or income. If there's enough income, even through a separation, maybe that continues. But Yeah, I guess those are all, there's still that sort of question of, okay, but what happens eventually, because the goal is a move
That you're
towards
separate.
financial independence eventually. Yeah, so understanding the law is important, taking some time to think about, what now, now that the future doesn't look like potentially what you thought it was going to look like. Do you have enough assets, income, to sort of maintain a standard of living that you're okay with, or do you need to increase your income in order to do that?
Okay, so I have a question too. So I always wondered this, and maybe this is American, maybe this is Canadian, maybe it's all, I don't know. What is the difference between, okay, so we have child support, that's one layer,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Mm-hmm.
child support is just what it is.
Yeah.
And there's spousal support, which is not legally binding, right? It's an agreement, but it's an agreement that you don't have to pay spousal support. Is that correct?
Well, if you're ordered to pay spousal support, you do. So,
interesting.
Yeah. So it is legally binding as long as it's put into a court order or into a legal separation agreement. It becomes a legally binding agreement. The difference, I think, maybe what you're
alluding
to, maybe what you're alluding to is the fact that there are child support guidelines that are, very clear, that are
mandatory.
That are set up by the government based on your income, based on how many children you have. It's a table. It's very easy to find what your child support obligation would be. Spousal support, there are guidelines, but there's no hard and fast rules about how much or how long or whether there is entitlement. I mean, there's certainly, they're guidelines. That's what it is. And so every situation, again, is different.
And what's alimony?
Alimony is equivalent to spousal support. I think that term is more used in the States.
That's what I was wondering, because I've heard like alimony payments, and I'm like, what is that? Is that spousal support? I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's good. I needed clarification. I'm sure some of you out there probably have heard these things too, so you needed clarification too.
Yeah, and if you haven't been there before, you don't know.
True. And okay, so standard mediation.
Yeah.
I'm coming in. I only have my own to reference. So I look at mine and I'm like, it was pretty clean cut. We came up with the separation agreement really, really fast. We only needed to talk about a couple things, and then the rest of it was pretty cut and dry. I'm guessing we're not the norm.
You're probably the norm for my clients. Most of my clients are very amicable. I always say if you've made it into my office, then that indicates a strong willingness to work together. Especially if you've made it into my office without lawyers, that's indicative of sort of how the outcome is going to go. But I know that there are lots of couples that is not the norm, and there's lots of family law lawyers that are working very hard out there, because there are lots of couples that aren't doing it that way. And not all mediations are, cut and dry and easy. They're all very, very different. And, depending on what, again, going back to that sort of what headspace people are in, sometimes people are able to move through the process very efficiently and quickly. And sometimes it's a longer process that is, that requires many more meetings, depending on the assets that need to be valued or divided, depending on the level of disclosure. So how easily or freely information is moving between the parties. If there's a mediation is based on full and frank disclosure, first of all. So if one party is feeling like they are not receiving the information that they need to in order to make good decisions about how to move forward, then that might not be the right process, or some of that might need to be done through the lawyers before they can come back to really get into the details of it.
Because this disclosure is mandatory law.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
just thinking about other people and situations that I know of, some that are
Mm-hmm.
so long and drawn out.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, first and foremost, headspace and how you move into it is beneficial. What would you say, like, I think with my ex and I, we spoke a lot before we ever came and saw you. And we were
Mm-hmm.
pretty open, and we knew that there was issues with us.
Right.
So we moved into this with a pretty, I mean, it wasn't easy, but we moved into this with a pretty open mind and put, like, our first and foremost thought was we put the kids first. We put
Mm-hmm.
ourselves aside and the kids come first. So most of our decisions were based from that space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to think, I think we came and saw you about 3-4 months after we decided we were splitting.
Mm-hmm.
Is that pretty normal? Or would
Yep.
you say that most people are like longer than that? Or like, I know I'm asking for some timelines here, and that
Yeah. No,
probably varies
I
from person to person.
it does. It certainly varies. I've had couples that have come in that have been separated for 5 years and they just haven't made any official decisions,
And that's not a problem when it comes to, because I know like the agreement, the separation agreement
Mhm.
is like
Mhm.
there to protect all parties.
Right. Yeah. So they just wouldn't have had an agreement. So it can muddy the waters potentially as you move through trying to figure out what a go forward agreement would look like. I don't recommend waiting 5 years, certainly. But I would say a couple months is usually a pretty standard time frame between when people decide to separate. They generally take a couple months to sort of get their head on straight and grieve a little bit, and then it's time to make some decisions. Often during that couple months people are still in the same house and they're just
Yeah.
trying to figure out, okay, who's staying, can one of us stay, do we have to sell the house, and as they start to discuss these different options, it becomes apparent that maybe they need some help.
A third party. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's so often what goes on in our own headspace. I'm smart. I can figure this out on my own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't need marriage counseling. I can figure this out on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and sometimes people come into mediation with a sense about how they want to move forward, or they have an idea about how they want to divide their assets, but it's really figuring out, is this really plausible, and can we make this work from a financial perspective.
Would you say that's the biggest part of mediation is really the finance?
Um, I would say probably the kids and the finances are probably fairly equal. It just depends on how detailed people need or want to be with their parenting plans. Sometimes parents are fully able and capable and want to just sort of negotiate that on an ongoing basis between them. They can figure out how to handle summer holidays, or they can figure out, how to share long weekends. And some parents need a very detailed plan about what next year looks like. And I think that goes back to that conflict piece, right? If it's going to create conflict in the future, then we want to address it in mediation. So we want to reduce the potential for any ongoing conflict as much as possible, to allow parents to then really focus on just parenting.
Being good parents. It's funny. I totally forgot about the parent plan. Completely forgot about that. So let's talk about that a little bit, because there's the separation agreement, which is, it's really assets, it's spousal support, it's child support. It was, I'm just trying to think all the things that were in there. Is the parent plan part of that, or is it a separate
Yep.
agreement? I can't remember.
No, it would typically be part of the separation agreement. Um, it's just a matter of how detailed it is. It can be, very detailed for some, and can be fairly open. The main pieces that I think need to be addressed in the separation agreement is who's making major decisions for the kids. So whether you have joint custody versus sole custody, that's, about decision making more than it is about where the kids are living. And then we have the actual parenting plan. So who's parenting the children when.
Right. So like
and
50-50
it can
or
be,
whatever.
yeah, it can be, that the kids primarily reside with one parent, or they, primarily reside with both parents on a schedule, to be determined between them, or in a schedule that looks like A, B, C, and D. It just depends how specific couples want to get.
And I've heard some really interesting ideas too around like the home that the kids are in. So sometimes the primary home will be where the kids stay, and the parents will go back and forth.
Nesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
We don't do
Bird
that,
nesting. Yeah.
but for
Um,
some it functions really well.
yeah. Lots of, I wouldn't say lots. Many couples do that sort of initially, because they don't know who's going to live in the house, or can they buy, can one of them buy the other one out, or do they need to sell it? And so sometimes just to get into two separate homes, but to not disrupt the children's routine as much, they will take turns sort of coming into the house where the children are living, and then on their non-parenting time, they will go somewhere else. So sometimes that works well if they have a place to go on their off weeks, but it's not sustainable long term. Generally, it's very hard to live out of two homes. But on the flip side, I think it gives parents an idea of what their kids' lives are potentially going to be like, and so it just maybe is a good exercise in how to make it easier for your kids as they move forward, to this transitioning, whether it's, just on alternate weekends, or whether it's 5, 6, 7 days every 2 weeks, it doesn't really matter. Transitions are transitions.
Something we're discovering right now. So the kids are open to call either of us anytime when we're not with each other, or if I don't have the kids, they talk, or I mean, if I have the kids, often they talk to their dad or whatever. And we sometimes set up like, we've talked about like date night. So one of the parents will take one of the kids, or sometimes, I don't know, like we'll have 2 weeks once in a while. Typically we're week, but we'll have 2 weeks sometimes. And then one of those days I will come pick up the kids for lunch because I miss them and I want to see them, or whatever. And the agreements are pretty fluid. Like we're pretty good that way.
Yeah.
And I find that's a lot easier for the kids to adjust. A lot easier for the kids to adjust when they have access to both parents at whenever they want.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, one thing that happens when a family moves into two households, when you're in one home, there's often that sort of built-in one-on-one time with kids, just because somebody has an extracurricular activity somewhere, and so one of the parents takes them, and then the other parent is maybe at home with the other kids, or it's just tends to be more built into that day-to-day life, where when you're parenting in separate homes, often the kids are sort of a joint unit that are sort of moving around to whatever activities or whichever house. And so I think that any opportunity that you have to build in some of that one-on-one time is really, really important for the kids.
I totally agree. Like, I can't say how incredible it is to have the opportunity to just spend time with one. Because first of all, they fight all the time. They're boys and they're close in age. But
I have those. Yeah.
my pain.
Yep.
But it's amazing because they're just such different people when they're by themselves. And you're like, wow, you're so lovely.
Yeah. I like you.
I like you. You're a good little person. Yeah. Can we do this more often? Yes.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about having those moments instead of the always together. And that's great if you can find that with your ex when there's 2 or 3 or whatever, but just to be able to arrange those moments because they are so important. I just think so often around why people get divorced to begin with, and it's communication breakdown. There's many factors that come into play. Growth. I think sometimes it's just a matter of 2 people growing in different directions. As we get older and we discover more about who we are, or we dig into who we are, we realize that we just aren't aligned anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
instead of being upset with, and this is where I got to, instead of looking at people from oh, you're bad, or you're not this, or you're not this for me, it was more of an alignment of, this is who I am and this is who you are. And we are very, very, it's not even about being different people. It's just just on different paths. And
Right.
just acknowledging that two good people can be on different paths, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that you don't have to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. There's there's so many feelings, around divorce, that shame and blame and guilt and all of those things. And, the truth is that we're never inside anybody else's relationship. We don't have any idea what that might look like. And just being able to acknowledge, as you said, that there is a misalignment, and for whatever reason, there are now different paths, and that's okay.
It's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that you say that about shame and guilt, because one of the first things, I'll never forget this is before I went through big growth period with myself and a lot of understanding of me, because I wasn't willing to do that earlier on. But when I did that, and I went, I should feel grateful that he doesn't hit me, that he isn't abusive, so I should just be happy. What's wrong with me?
Right.
What's wrong with me? Nothing's wrong with me. We're just not, we are moving in very different directions and can't seem to find our common ground. And sometimes we're fortunate enough, and counseling will help us get back on track, because it may just be a communication breakdown. It may just be that that's something we needed help with, because again, I don't go to my mechanic for my teeth to get done, or right. I don't assume that I could do my own dental work other than brush my teeth and floss them, right? I know I can't do my own dental work.
Basic maintenance, yeah.
So whatever leads us to believe that we can manage all situations in relationships or changes in relationships, I don't know. It just seems so such a juxtaposition in truth, because it's very far from. Often we can't manage these things on our own, and we do need some intervention. And often we do need that person that is impartial, because right. as we were talking about the emotions and these thoughts, and I should feel this way, and what's wrong with me? And it's none of these things. And the impartial comes in as such a benefit to helping us navigate these waters about whether or not we can reconcile, right? Whether or not we can find our way into the new norm. What is the new norm? Because we never go back to what was, ever.
Right.
We change. We grow or not, but we are always moving. So we never go back there. But if we can't, then it's really great to have people that we can bring into the mix that can help us through these periods in ways that set us straight when we're going askew. I will never forget the conversation we had around my business at the time. And you were wonderful in that situation. And you just said, it's her business, and she has every right to make these decisions in her business. And I went, thank you. Thank you. Because I felt, again, caught up in emotion and in our own patterns often. I felt I needed to validate. I felt I needed to fight for this. I felt I didn't have the final decision in my own life. And let me tell you how valuable that moment was to me. Made all the world of difference.
That's awesome. Thank you.
But that's what mediation can do. It's the impartial saying, no, this is legitimate, and that's completely fair, and that's completely fine. And it wasn't just a validation on my part. It was just knowing that it's okay to have, to want to drive these things, right. or to make these decisions myself, or for him to make decisions himself that weren't with me intervening. Or me
Mediation
saying
can
yes
be
or no.
it can be a very powerful process because you are in control. It's your decisions. Um, Nobody's going to tell you, what you can or can't do. As long as you understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. So again, with the assistance of a lawyer saying, do you understand what you're doing? Do you understand the
Right.
implications of what you're agreeing to? As long as you have that, you can do what you want to do. You get to control what your what your separation or your divorce looks like.
In your future.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And you don't have to be stuck in the decisions of others
Mm-hmm.
because it is your life.
Yeah.
It's the crazy parts of divorce is you don't know what that looks like on the other side. And
Right.
when you're coming from a space where one typically makes the decisions more than the other, and then you start empowering yourself with decisions, it's scary in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, can I do this? Am I allowed to do this?
Yeah.
Should I do this? And oh my God, what if I do this and I do it wrong?
Yeah.
But it's
There's always somebody in a relationship that just naturally sort of has taken on more of those decisions. Very, very rarely are people equal in terms of, their understanding of their finances or their understanding of how the household budget is run. I mean, that's just not realistic, right? That generally falls to one person. So somebody else is always playing catch up, and it could be either partner. There's no hard and fast rules about that.
totally true.
Yeah. So it's a learning and a growing and a evolving for sure.
The joys of separation. But there can be
but it's
joys.
not but it's not all bad. Exactly.
No, there can be joys.
Often the mediation process and that period of time where you're determining what your future looks like, what your parenting schedule looks like, how you're going to divide your assets, where you're going to live, all of that stuff. I mean, that's the thick of it. That's really the thick of it. And we're just trying to help get you to the other side, so that you can exhale and then decide what's next for me.
It's funny that you say that. It does feel like you're holding your breath.
Mm-hmm.
It does feel like finally in the end, you're like, I can breathe. I can breathe.
Right.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it is the heaviest parts. The heaviest parts are the early stages of the separation. The latter
Mm-hmm.
parts, provided both parties have moved into a healthier emotional
Mm-hmm.
standpoint. And honestly,
Right.
if you're in the midst of a divorce that's really emotionally charged, highly recommend seeing someone. Highly, highly recommend seeing someone and doing some inner work, because this is so crucial to us being good people out in the world.
Absolutely.
If I'm always looking at my spouse, which, oh my goodness, I did this for a long time, but you, I didn't want to look at me. I didn't want to look at me, and I didn't want to look at the things that I was doing or be responsible for the things that I was doing in that relationship and the demise of that relationship either.
Yeah.
It was very easy to blame. But I'm telling you, owning those things in a healthy way, not in a destructive way where there's guilt and shame wrapped around it, but in a healthy way, made the world of difference in what I do now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the freedom that you experience and the freedom you give other people to experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Divorce doesn't have to be horrible.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I was talking with my 15-year-old yesterday, and I said, what do you think? How would you explain divorce? Do you think it always has to be a negative thing? And he said, no. It's just sort of perspective.
Well, and looking at it from a kid's perspective too, I think I'm really grateful that the boys, yes, we separated, but the boys will look at us as two very happy people now instead of two very unhappy people together.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not only, again, looking at the relationship from this is my normal and this is what love looks like. Two people who fight all the time or two people who don't talk. Whatever your scenario is, but that becomes their normal. And it's really beautiful to show them that you can empower things and do it in ways that benefit all parties, and that the love is still there. It just
Right.
looks different.
Right. Yeah. And I think it doesn't even have to be, an experience of, these are unhappy people and now, these are happy people. It can just be an experience of, this is me living in alignment with myself, or this is
Right.
me living my truth. That wasn't serving me, or that wasn't, that wasn't
True.
right for me anymore. It doesn't
Yep.
have to be a negative thing. It doesn't have to be
Yep.
something that you suffered through. It can just be something that was, and now
Absolutely.
there's something else. So again, taking out some of that,
Negative emotion. Yep.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think the boys are stronger, better people on the outside, like on the outside of the divorce, and than what they would have experienced had we stayed together. And I'm grateful for that. And really, in the long run, all of us are grateful for that.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. And kids are resilient. Adults are resilient. We are all sort of meant to change and grow and morph through our lives.
Yes, we are.
So
change is not a bad thing. It can be an excellent thing. I find change becomes a bad thing when we don't want it, when we struggle and
when
resist
we resist it. Yeah.
Yep. It's about the resistance of the change. The change is there. It's happening. It's a matter of whether or not we accept it and surrender to that change, or fight it tooth and nail.
Right. Yeah. Are you going to be an active participant in, designing your future, or are you going to let it happen to you? Are you going to let other people tell you what it's going to look like? And that's definitely a harder place, I think.
That's being cast down the river with no boat, no oars, and just letting it take you wherever it goes. Life doesn't have to be like that at all. We can make wonderful choices, and they're not always easy, but they're simple.
Yeah. And I think that, sometimes people, there's so much sort of heaviness around that, that making the decision, around, okay, am I deciding to leave? Am I deciding that I'm going to ask for divorce? Am I deciding that the relationship is over? And sometimes I think having some education around, what could my life look like if I decided to leave, just sort of taking some of that fear of the unknown out sometimes can just create some space, to then really focus on the decision, as opposed to, but what does it look like? But how does this impact me? It somehow it shifts the ability to decide. So I think that information and knowledge is so powerful, and just an understanding of what could be on that other side allows people, and sometimes gives them the strength to make that decision.
Yeah, to take the leap, because it becomes a leap. I'll never forget like what ultimately did it for me. I was unhappy. I knew that. And we got into a point where the relationship was just, we couldn't repair it. And I woke up at 5:00 in the morning and I wrote in my journal, which I hadn't written in years, which was so bizarre, this particular journal. But I wrote in that journal, and I wrote about the person I'd become, and the person I didn't want to be, and the person I did want to be, and how I couldn't be there. I couldn't be that person in this space. I needed to open the space. I had to. Something had to change. And for me, it was leaving. And that ultimately is, yes, it's scary because it's the unknown. But if we know that we're going to be okay, we have support systems, we have wonderful mediators who who do some of the legwork for us and help us out, and are very wonderful impartials that can come in and guide us. We're not alone in the process. Makes a world of difference knowing that you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. Yeah, there's some growing
Yeah.
pains.
Yeah. Yeah. What's that saying? Nobody ever died of divorce.
That's a good saying. You won't die from divorce.
You won't die from divorce.
No,
Yeah.
it's a good saying.
The other one that I like is getting divorced sucks, but being divorced doesn't.
True. True. An interesting thing about talking about opening up space. So I had a very weird incident with a dating experience. So break up with someone, it's tough, it's whatever. And then literally like a little while later, I'm in an airplane on a date. Okay, so I'm on this sunrise 2-seater, he's a pilot, airplane ride. It's 7:00 in the morning. The sun is coming up, or 6:30. I don't know what it was. It was really early. It was the most spectacular flight. And it hits me as I'm sitting in the airplane and I've got this grin like a 5-year-old kid because I'm so excited to be in this plane. It's just so amazing, this experience. And we're flying over the mountains and in and out. And it's just so beautiful. And I think to myself, I wouldn't have been here. I wouldn't have experienced this. I wouldn't have, like, none of this would have existed had that space not opened up.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was holding myself in a lot of fear for a long, long time. Yeah. And then opening that space shifted it all. So the opportunities that sit on the other side can be mind-blowing when we open the space. So if that's something that we leave people with a notion around divorce, and you know that this is where you're at. I'm not saying everyone should get divorced, because that's certainly not what I'm
absolutely.
saying.
Right.
Not what I'm saying.
Me either.
Yeah, no. But when you're sure, like I knew, I was sure when we went through divorce counseling and it didn't get where it needed to go. We knew then. But when you're sure, just know that you're opening up space for something absolutely potentially amazing to come in.
Yeah,
if you're willing to allow it, right?
Yeah. And I think just to add on that, when you say, when you know, sometimes there's one person that knows and the other person says, but I don't know. I didn't make that decision.
Yeah.
To be able to even then say, but maybe there's some space that's opening something else.
If you're the one that didn't know, right?
Because really, even if you're the one that didn't know, you deserve to be with somebody that knows that they want to be with you.
Yes, and that aligns with you, because two people may not align well together. They could be great people not together. But each of them absolutely is worthy of a partner that lights them up inside, just as much as they light their partner up inside. And they can co-create beautiful things in life together. And why would you not want that? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Alignment's an amazing thing. For me, and I can only speak for myself in this space, but for me, it was a lot of, I'm blaming the external. I'm blaming everything outside of me, right? As soon as I did some work, I recognized everything's about me. My life is presenting for me. So, it's about me. So what am I not looking at here? It's because I'm looking at you. I'm not looking at me. As soon as you do that inner work, alignment becomes really easy. You know what you want. You know who you are. You know how to articulate these things. And you say no to the things that don't align. And then all of a sudden, well, it's not really all of a sudden, all these things start showing up that are aligned with you, because there's no mixed messages going out anymore. You just are you. And then things show up and you're like, wow, I had no idea this was even possible. Because people will say, well, this is as good as it gets. Or, well, we have to compromise and settle. Well, compromise, yes, life is sometimes compromising, but it's agreements. And settling, I don't agree with that. I don't think we have to settle. I think we compromise because we say there's value here, but settling, no. And a marriage shouldn't be about settling. It's a partnership. I had the very coolest, and I'm going to end on this. I had the coolest conversation with a friend of mine who is a little bit older. He's a doctor, and we were talking about the agreements we have with our partners. And he said there is a very good friend of his that every 3 years they reassess the relationship and determine whether or not they are still on the same path and whether they want to continue every 3 years. So there's no taking things for granted. There's no assumptions that, oh, well, I can just, slack off and who cares? None of that. It's like, I'm in because I'm in. Or you know what? Nope. This just doesn't feel right for me, or whatever the case may be. And it's fascinating when you look at things from a perspective of entitlement. Okay, so I'm married, so now I'm entitled to this marriage. Doesn't matter what I do in it, I'm entitled to it. Or you look at it from the perspective of, this is something that I am nurturing, working with, sometimes compromising. But it's an agreement that's fluid and always moving. And I'm striving for something that's great and building something that's great and creating that. Yeah, there's nothing taken for granted. I love that. I was like, that is the best agreement ever.
It's a perspective. It's a perspective shift on the same idea. It's still a relationship. You're just actively having a conversation and presumably keeping the lines of communication open about, is this something that I am still choosing?
Is this something I'm still choosing? Because if there's anything I've learned over these last few years, really, it's been around choice and how we have so many choices in a day, and choosing not to choose is still a choice.
Right.
And choosing our partners, choosing the way that we have relationships. It's funny because I'm about to run a 5-day challenge on how to improve your relationship. And it's a choice on how we choose to look at the relationship, what we want from the relationship, where we value the relationship. I made an active choice to improve the relationship I have with my boys. And most of the times, I'm really proud of where we've gotten. Every once in a while, I'm human and I totally mess up, but then I own it. And I own it. And I'm like, I totally screwed up here. I brought this garbage into this moment, and I'm sorry. That's on me.
Yeah.
But we choose this with all relationships, and it doesn't matter if it's romantic or not.
Absolutely.
And nurture. What do we stick in our gardens, right? Am I just going to stick we'll see, if I say I stick a bunch of poo in there, but in a garden, that can be good. Hopefully it's good poo. Susan, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your wisdom and insights into the uncharted waters of leaving relationships and separating, and what that can be like, and how it doesn't have to be something so debilitating or so frightening, and that we do have lots of options regardless of whether we stay together or don't stay together.
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was fun and I enjoyed the conversation. Yeah.
I love that you came on here. So I have to share this with them. So Susan's been asked many times to go and do stuff like this, and she said no to everybody but us. Yay! I'm so glad.
It's because you're so easy to talk to, Brandy. It's just an easy conversation.
But that's the way it should be, right? That's the way it should be.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for making it painless.
I'm so grateful, because I'm positive there will be a lot of people that will gain value from this. So if you want to contact Susan, there's going to be notes there'll be details in the show notes on how to contact her if you are in the midst of needing some help. I have a weird question for you. So mediation in your field only revolves around divorce, correct?
Typically, but not always. So sometimes there is family mediation, so inter-family dynamics, parent-teen stuff, blended family stuff. The majority of what I do, though, is divorce, but that's not all.
Okay, so that's good to know. So
that's,
if you
that's
have
a whole other show.
So if you have some questions around mediation and you need, I'm telling you, there's something to be said about an impartial. So good, because there's no emotional attachment, right? And that's where we get crazy. Yeah, if you need that, Susan is wonderful. I can highly attest.
Thank you.
All right, Susan, have an absolutely amazing day. Thanks again for being on the podcast.
Of course. Thanks, Brandy.
Now, beautiful peeps, if you are looking for guidance, if you are finding yourself lost, overwhelmed, spinning in circles, really struggling in your life, come to Fear It Goes. There is nothing in this world that prevents us from succeeding but ourselves. Nothing. And no matter the content I bring you or anyone else brings you or that you seek out will actually stick until you clear those beliefs. Our internal world is shaping our external world. So this morning I had a fascinating experience with writing, meditation, and what came out of that. And the book is coming. The book is called It's All About You, Baby. How to live your authentic truth, your authentic self in an inauthentic world. We are plagued with so many conditions. Plagued. And we have all the tools we need and all the strength and all the guidance and all the wisdom and all the information we could possibly dream up and more at our fingertips. It's up to us to open them. It's up to us to open them. And I can't wait to give you all you need to be able to do it all yourself. It sounds so funny, right? So I am joyfully writing the book. It's all about you, baby. And I've set up a Patreon account for both the podcast and the book. I would love for some of you to come on board and sponsor this movement. Because what I've recognized is this: the things we put out into the world are what we're receiving. If I keep putting out playing small, I play small. I have to go big, and that requires a lot of courage, and part of that courage is asking. So I'm going to ask for help where I need it. I would very much be grateful in accepting the gift of sponsorship through anyone who would like to do that. I've set up the Patreon account under Fear It Goes, and anybody who comes on and sponsors the podcast will receive a book when it's done. So if you're a consistent sponsor, you will receive a copy of the book signed by me personally, and I very much look forward to giving you that gift, because what's coming in that book will blow your mind. It's blown mine. And I can't wait to give it. Next week's podcast is a massive insight I had that concluded this morning. So I cannot wait to give you what's coming. And it's one of my vulnerable moments I really don't like sharing. None of us do. None of us want to share these moments. But I'm really glad I am, because it should give you something to help you move yourself. Until next week, my beautiful souls, have an absolutely extraordinary week.